Part 1 at the sound that echoed through war. The first thing men remembered was not the sight of the weapon, nor the weight of it in their hands, it was the sound. A sharp, ripping burst that tore through silence like fabric being violently split apart. In the early decades of the 20th century, when war was still imagined as lines of men firing bolt-action rifles across muddy fields, the Thompson submachine gun arrived like something from another age, faster, louder, more intimate. It did not belong to the distant rhythm of battlefield exchanges. It belonged to chaos, to close quarters, to the sudden moment when survival was measured in seconds. Born in the aftermath of World War I, the weapon was not initially embraced by the military. Its origins were tied to a vision of trench warfare that had already ended, and for a time it found itself drifting into the hands of law enforcement and infamously, into the underworld of American crime during Prohibition. The image of men in fedoras, suits, and long coats, wielding the Thompson with drum magazines, cemented its early identity as a gangster's tool. But history would reshape its legacy. As another global war approached, the United States began to see the weapon for what it truly was, and not a relic, but a precursor. In an era where battles would be fought not only across open fields but within forests, cities, and tight defensive positions, the need for rapid firepower at close range became undeniable. The Thompson was no longer a curiosity. It was a solution waiting for the right war. And when that war came, it would carry the voices of thousands of paratroopers descending into darkness, Marines advancing through jungle heat, soldiers pushing through shattered streets. The Tommy gun was not just a weapon. It was a presence, a sound that would come to define moments of fear, courage, and survival. A sound that, once heard, was never forgotten. Part 2a forged between innovation and violence. Before it became a weapon of war, the Thompson was an idea, one shaped by both ambition and contradiction. Designed by General John T. Thompson, it was envisioned as a trench broom, a firearm capable of sweeping enemy trenches with overwhelming firepower. Yet, by the time it was ready, the trenches of Europe had already fallen silent. What remained was a weapon ahead of its time, struggling to find its place. Its design was elegant in its brutality, using a blowback system that allowed for rapid automatic fire, paired with a powerful .45 ACP cartridge. Each round was heavy, deliberate, and devastating at close range. But with that power came weight. The early models were not light weapons, they were solid, almost stubbornly so, constructed with milled steel and fine craftsmanship that made them expensive and complex to produce. This was not a disposable tool. It was built with precision, with intention, and perhaps without full awareness of the role it would eventually play. During the 1920s and early 1930s, the Thompson became synonymous with violence of a different kind. Bank robberies, organized crime, and infamous shootouts turned the weapon into a symbol of lawlessness. Its distinctive silhouette and drum magazine became etched into public consciousness, not as a soldier's companion, but as an instrument of chaos. Yet beneath that image lay something else: potential. Military strategists began to reconsider the weapon as the nature of combat evolved. The rise of mechanized warfare, urban engagements, and specialized units demanded something different from traditional rifles. They needed mobility, speed, and the ability to dominate at close range. The Thompson, once dismissed, suddenly made sense. It was not just a weapon of violence, it was a weapon of transition, bridging the gaps between old wars and new ones. And as the world moved inevitably toward another global conflict, the Tommy gun waited, silent and ready, to be redefined. Part 3a Into the Sky with the Airborne. When American paratroopers stepped into the aircraft that would carry them into the unknown, they carried more than just equipment, they carried a fragile certainty that once the jump began, there would be no turning back. In the darkness before D-Day, as engines roared and the vibration of the plane settled into their bones, many of them held on to the Thompson not just as a weapon, but as reassurance. Unlike long rifles, it was compact enough for the chaos of airborne landings. Unlike pistols, it offered the firepower needed to survive the first moments after hitting the ground, moments when confusion, isolation, and fear were at their peak. The jump itself was disorienting. Winter wore out uniforms, parachutes snapped open with violent force, and the ground rushed upward faster than the mind could fully comprehend. Men landed scattered, often far from their intended drop zones, in hedgerows, fields, and flooded terrain. And in those first uncertain seconds, when the night was filled with distant gunfire and shouted commands in unfamiliar directions, the Thompson became something more than a tool, it became a lifeline. Its rapid bursts allowed small groups of soldiers to establish control, to push back against enemies who might otherwise overwhelm them. The .45 caliber rounds did not just wound, they stopped. In close encounters, where hesitation could mean death, the Thompson's reliability and draw power gave paratroopers an edge that was both physical and psychological. Yet it was not without its challenges. The weapon was heavy, and ammunition was limited. Every burst had to count. Every decision carried weight. But in the chaos of airborne operations, where the line between order and collapse was razor-thin, the Thompson proved itself again and again. It was not the weapon of a distant marksman, it was the weapon of a soldier standing face to face with uncertainty, choosing to act rather than hesitate. Part 4. Around the jungle and the weight of survival.
Something's out there.
Far from the fields of Europe, in the suffocating heat of the Pacific, the nature of war shifted again. Here, visibility was limited, distances were short, and the enemy could be anywhere or nowhere until the moment of contact. In this environment, the Thompson found a new identity. It was no longer just a weapon of paratroopers or specialized units, it became a companion for Marines navigating dense jungle terrain where every step could lead into an ambush. The air was thick, heavy with humidity, and every movement felt slowed by the environment itself. Rifles, while effective at range, were often too long, too cumbersome for the tight confines of jungle warfare. The Thompson, despite its weight, offered something invaluably: immediacy. When contact was made, it was sudden and violent. There was no time to aim carefully, no time to consider distance or trajectory. There was only reaction. And in those moments, the Thompson excelled. Its bursts could cut through foliage, suppress hidden enemies, and create space where none existed before. Soldiers learned to trust its presence, to rely on its ability to respond as quickly as their instincts demanded. But the jungle was unforgiving. Moisture threatened to corrode metal, mud clung to every surface, and the constant strain of the environment tested both men and machines. The Thompson required care, attention, and discipline. It was not a weapon that could be neglected. And yet, despite these challenges, it endured. It became part of the rhythm of jungle warfare: the sudden crack of gunfire, the echo through dense vegetation, the brief silence that followed. In these distant battlefields, far from home, the Thompson was more than a firearm. It was a connection to survival, a reminder that even in the most hostile environments, there was something within reach that could tip the balance, even if only for a moment. Part 5. Steel, wood, and human hands. Every weapon tells a story, but the Thompson told its story through the hands that carried it. Its wooden grip, worn smooth by use, bore silent witness to countless moments of hands gripping tighter in fear, steadying in determination, trembling in exhaustion. The cold steel of its body reflected not just light, but the realities of war itself. It was a machine, yes, but it was also an extension of the soldier who held it. The weight of the Thompson was often remarked upon, not just physically, but symbolically. It was heavier than many of its counterparts, a reminder that power often comes at a cost. Carrying it meant sacrificing mobility, accepting fatigue, and committing to a role that demanded proximity to danger. But for those who used it, The trade-off was clear. In close combat, where hesitation could be fatal, the Thompson offered something few other weapons could: a certainty. Its operation was straightforward, its response immediate. There was no ambiguity in its purpose. It was built to act, to respond, to dominate in the narrow spaces where battles were decided in seconds. And yet, behind every burst of fire was a human story. Soldiers who carried the Thompson were not defined by the weapon, but by the choices they made while holding it. The decision to advance, to hold position, to protect others. These were not functions of the machine, but of the individual. The Thompson did not create courage. It revealed it. It did not eliminate fear. It existed alongside it. In the end, the weapon was only as meaningful as the moments it was part of. And in those moments, it became something more than steel and wood. It became memory, experience, and sometimes, the thin line between survival and loss. Part 6: The Evolution of War.
The grease gun's simpler,
as the war progressed, the role of the Thompson began to shift. New weapons emerged, lighter, cheaper, and easier to produce. The realities of industrial warfare demanded efficiency, and the finely crafted Thompson, once a symbol of precision, became increasingly difficult to justify on a large scale. The M3 grease gun would eventually take its place in many units, offering a simpler alternative that could be produced quickly and in greater numbers. Yet the Thompson did not disappear. It remained in use, valued by those who understood its strengths and were willing to accept its limitations. Its presence became more selective, more deliberate. It was no longer the default choice, but it was still a respected one. The evolution of warfare was not just about technology, it was about adaptation. Each new weapon reflected a shift in priorities, a redefinition of what mattered most in the chaos of conflict. But the Thompson represented something different. It was not designed for compromise. It was designed for impact. And in that sense, it remained relevant, even as the world moved forward. Soldiers who carried it often did so by choice, not necessity. They understood what it offered, and they were willing to bear its weight for the advantages it provided. In the broader context of the war, the Thompson became a bridge between eras, a reminder of where warfare had been, and a glimpse of where it was going. It was not perfect. It was not efficient. But it was effective, and sometimes, that was enough. Part 7: Echoes that remain. Long after the war ended, the sound of the Thompson did not disappear, it lingered. Not in the air, but in memory. For those who had carried it, who had relied on it in moments of uncertainty and fear, it became part of something larger than itself. It was no longer just a weapon. It was a symbol of experience, of survival, of choices made under pressure that could never fully be explained to those who had not been there. Museums would display it behind glass, its metal polished, its wood preserved, its history summarized in small plaques that could never capture the full weight of what it had been. Films would recreate its sound, its presence, its role in shaping the narrative of war. But these representations, while powerful, were only echoes of something more real. The true story of the Thompson was not in its design, or its production, or even its use. It was in the moments it was part of, the brief, intense, irreversible moments where lives were changed forever. And in those moments, it stood as both witness and participant. The world moved on. Technology advanced. Warfare evolved. But the Thompson remained, not as a relic, but as a reminder. A reminder that behind every weapon is a human story, and behind every sound of gunfire is a moment that cannot be undone. Part 8: The Final Silence. In the end, what remains is not the weapon, but the silence that follows it. The Thompson, once a force of overwhelming sound and presence, becomes still, its purpose fulfilled, its story carried forward not by action, but by memory. It exists now in a different space, one where its significance is no longer measured in rounds fired or battles fought, but in the lives it touched and the moments it defined. There is a weight to that silence, a sense that something once powerful has been set aside, not forgotten, but understood. The soldiers who carried it have long since returned home, or have become part of history themselves. Their experiences, their fears, their courage, these are the true legacy of the Thompson. The weapon was only ever a part of that story. But it was a part that mattered. And as we look back, not just at the weapon, but at the world it existed in, we are reminded of something essential: that history is not made by machines, but by people. The Thompson was never just a gun. It was a companion in moments of uncertainty, a tool in moments of necessity, and a witness to moments that would shape lives forever. And in that final silence, it leaves behind something more enduring than sound. It leaves behind memory,